Well, my name is Dr. Ron Berman. I'm Assistant Dean of the College of Doctoral Studies. I want to welcome everyone here today. We started doing alumni presentations of dissertation about a year and a half ago, and it provides an opportunity for a faculty, for a graduate, an alumni to share their dissertation defense, but more importantly, to share the lessons that they've learned along the way, the little tidbits of knowledge that enable them to succeed in a very difficult endeavor. So this is an opportunity for you to interact directly. Now, because this is a webinar with a fairly large number of people, we will be transmitting our video out. We will not be transmitting your video and audio back to us. So the way this was working, if you have questions, please use the chat function, and I'll be monitoring the chat, and we'll try to answer as many of your questions as possible. We'll try to make this interactive as possible also. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Amanda King. Take it away.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. And for the record, that never gets old. So can you guys, I'm starting to share my screen here. So can someone just give me a sanity check that you are able to see my screen?
Yes.
Got it? Okay, good. So as mentioned, I will be talking through my dissertation. It won't be very interesting to most people. That's okay. But I'm going to be sharing some tidbits along the way of things that I did that helped me be successful in this process. I also have multiple screens here, so forgive the head turns. But I want to start, before I get into the next pages, I want to start you guys thinking about how you will be organized for the defense itself. One of the things that I did, it may not work for others, but I like colors. I have to color coordinate things. So I printed out for both my proposal and my dissertation defense, I printed out the whole packet, and I had colors that meant something with those little tabs throughout. So, green meant grit, and blue was commitment. And, if it was something to the methodology, it was red. If it was something to, the literature, it was a different color. So I had all of these colored tabs on this huge packet, so that if I was asked a question, you've got to have a real-time answer. And it's okay to go look at that. So I had the opportunity to go back and look at it if I needed to. What that did for me was allowed me to kind of review everything methodically as I was going through this, and I never had to look at it. So I had this huge stack with all these tabs in it that looked so pretty and professional, and I was all ready to go. Never touched it. But it was a good preparation for me, and it was there if I needed it. So as I'm going through this process, think about how you would organize that and what would work for you and the way your brain works. The other thing I'll say, just a quick story. So don't get too wrapped around the axle on where you end up defending, because sometimes timing of your chairs and your committees aren't going to align perfectly with your world. I wound up defending my proposal in the USO children's room of the airport when I was flying from Phoenix to, I think, France. And I had my computer literally stacked on top of board games. I think I was on Candyland and, some kind of checkers thing. And anyway, so just make sure you're flexible. So anyway, that's a quick story. So who am I? I am a senior director at Honeywell Aerospace. I'm senior director of breakthrough technology, which makes it sound a little bit like I'm a rocket scientist. Definitely not. But a funny story, someone actually thought I was. I'll maybe share that at the end. But I'm also a mother of two. I had two children during this process. It was total madness. I don't know what I was thinking, but we got through it. So you can see my sweet boys on the picture. I'm married to a Marine of 24 years. Clearly a Marine. You can see in the middle picture there. He's a little bit out of control. And he's also, he's in the reserves. His day job, he's a law enforcement officer, police officer. So there's a lot of energy and excitement in my house with my three boys. I'm a veteran myself. I served in the Army, my first big girl job out of my bachelor's program. And so we spend a lot of time working in the community on veterans and helping them get into careers and with that transition from military life to corporate life. So it's really a lot of fun. So we have a lot of fun in our household. And have some interesting dynamics in our lives. So let me talk through the dissertation defense itself. So this is basically a shortened version of what I used. So as we go through this, if there are questions, hopefully, Dr. Berman, you'll be able to kind of pause me and ask those questions real time so we can answer them. And you can get at least a flavor for what the defense presentation itself feels like. So why we're doing this is because there's this particular study on grit and organizational commitment. It's because there's a retention problem with healthcare professionals in the medical arena. So we need to understand what kind of attributes are going to help people be more committed to their company. So people are mostly committed to the industry. It's how do we get them to stay at their company? And the genesis of this actually was from a company that was looking to invest money into a program. So this was a great study for them to validate whether it made sense for them to make that financial investment for this program to develop attributes. So the history is that there's a shortage of medical professionals. There have been economic downturns. Psychiatric care specifically has been faced with recruiting crises for decades. It's a really tough field to work in. So this particular group that we studied were behavioral health medical professionals. So our purpose of this correlative study was to examine if and to what extent a relationship exists between grit and organizational commitment for behavioral health medical professionals, which we'll call BHMPs, and a medium-sized organization in the southwestern United States. The theoretical framework, there were two parts to this. So the first part is a three-component model of organizational commitment. So within that framework, you have effective commitment, which means I am personally affected by the organization. So I feel like I love this place, right? I might get if I work for Apple, I might get the Apple tattoo because I'm just so personally affected by this organization. I love it. Normative commitment means, I kind of feel like I owe something to the company, so I'm going to stay here. It might be that they paid my college tuition or, paid off student loans, or maybe they gave me a big sign-on bonus. So I feel like, maybe I owe them something. They're not a bad company, so I'm going to stick around. And continuance commitment is I feel like I'm here because I have to be. It's kind of if I leave, I lose my seniority. I've been here for 25 years and I don't get a pension anymore because pensions are kind of a thing of the past. So this type of commitment would be someone who feels maybe trapped. So they're here because they have to be. And then grit is defined as passion and perseverance for a long-term goal. This is a construct developed not too long ago, about 10 years ago. And the two main elements of this are passion, which is consistency of interest, and then perseverance, which is perseverance of effort. So highlights on this study, this is where the literature part comes in, are, there were some studies that studied grit and retention with these residency students in general surgery. And there were some other studies that were done that looked at Army Special Operations, sales folks that were doing vacation ownership sales, and then students in academia. So I'm going to pause right here and tell another quick story. So this is kind of the chapter 2 stuff, right? So I'm plugging along. I'm writing this chapter 2, and I'm thinking, I've got this thing all figured out. So I told Dr. Berman this story the other day, and I feel like I had perhaps a level of arrogance about my chapter 2. So I finally get this thing buttoned up. I send it off to my chair. She says, "Okay, this is good enough to send to your content expert." I thought I might win a Nobel Prize for it. It was amazing. My content expert sent it back, shredded. I mean, shredded this thing. I think there were more comments from her than actual words from me and changes that had to be made. So I had to pick my little ego up off the ground, brush myself off, and go redo this. I'm here to tell you that your committee is here to help you. If you experience that, don't take it personal. 1, it's not personal. And 2, you just kind of have to suck it up and do it, because the end result of what I got when I redid it, per my content expert's advice or direction, I guess you could say, I had a great product. I really did have a good product in the end.
Okay, Dr. King, there's a question.
Sure.
What is the area of expertise of your content expert?
So she also does research in organizations and retention. So she had a lot of background in this particular field. So grit maybe was a little bit of a new construct, but the organizational commitment piece, she was very, very knowledgeable on.
Okay.
So, so anyway, I just wanted to share that story.
Okay, there's another question. Is the back and forth typical of an academic peer review process? And is this something you've also seen working in the private sector?
Yes and yes. So you'll never submit something the first time to your committee and get kind of a first pass go. So you're always going to have iterations. And you kind of have to think of it, you know, like if I'm doing, so I work in aerospace. So the things that we do, you know, we're a highly governed, highly regulated environment. But we have to think about people's safety. We're sending them 30,000 feet in these little metal capsules to take them around the world. So you hope that people put a lot of effort into it. So it's kind of no different. You know, when I submit something here at work, I submit, you know, a white paper, or I have a team that's working on something. You know, before we ever get to the table of that VP or the executive VP, you know, we have multiple iterations. So you can't walk in and think, kind of like I did with my chapter 2, you can't walk in and think, wow, I just wrote an awesome product. What you have to think is, I just wrote a good foundation to start from. And you have to work from there. Everything is iterative, and the back and forth is certainly going to happen. That's a good question.
Okay.
And I would
There's a follow-on question. How many times did you go back and forth with your committee, and how many months did it take? Let's refer to, I guess, your manuscript itself.
So, so I officially started submitting stuff when I finished my coursework in, oh gosh, October of last year. I think was when I was assigned my chair and my committee. So we probably went back and forth maybe a dozen and a half times. I mean, it was, you know, a pretty significant number. I completed and got the official sign off that I had officially graduated in April. But I think from actually finishing and, you know, the bulk of it and excluding the IRB or the form and format process, that was probably the end of February. But I'll tell you this, we're going to get into kind of the timelines. It took a lot of effort to do it in that period of time. So, so we're going to talk about what my path was to get it done in that time frame. That is not typical. And that's not, I'm not trying to brag. I'm just saying I made a lot of sacrifices, and that's going to be my recommendation. We'll get to that in a minute.
Yes, but just to go back then, you started writing in October is when you submitted your proposal, or what did you submit your was that after IRB?
So I started, in October, I started submitting chapter 1. So actually, I think my first submittal was chapter 2, and then I went back into chapter 1 and then chapter 3.
So it was your proposal. It was proposal before IRB.
It was proposal before IRB.
So you basically started your proposal in October, and you were done in February with your manuscript. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah, and I walked in April.
Wow. That's
yeah,
great.
I remember the timeline. Yeah, so it's pretty aggressive. But again, we're going to talk about how you guys can do that too. Okay, so some highlights. This is still chapter 2, highlights of organizational commitment. You know, it was shown that the most positive effect on organizational commitment was effective commitment. So people that love their company, I mean, it kind of makes sense. It's fairly intuitive. And there's a strong linkage to retention and people's intent to stay. Normative commitment, you know, we talked about, they had a relationship with intention to stay. It wasn't as strong a correlation as effective, but it still had a correlation there. And the significance of this is it built on prior research on grit. So grit, if you kind of look at the history, which I won't get into, but there's a lot of really positive things. You know, people typically achieve more in life. They get higher levels of education. You know, I think of gritty people and I think of like Clint Eastwood or something like that. But really it's about people that can have a long-term goal and actually cross the finish line and get there. So there's a lot of benefits to grit. But there's a lot of gaps that have not been researched in that. So this added to that body of knowledge. So the gap in the literature was that, you know, retention or organizational commitment had been studied in a lot of populations. So medical health, behavioral professionals was one of those areas. So the problem statement, general problem addressed in this study was to determine if a relationship exists between grit and organizational commitment in behavioral health medical professionals. The specific problem addressed in this study was to determine if a relationship exists between the BHMP's self-perceived grit and organizational commitment. And the reason that's important is because this was these were both validated questionnaires that went out, and it's something that they answered themselves. So, there's always, a certain dynamic when you're answering questions that you have to account for in your risks that they might answer it the way they think you want to hear it. It's kind of like if your parents gave you a survey and said, do you think you're the best child ever? Yes, because I clean my room every day, whether you do or not. Yes, because I wash my hands. You're kind of going to say what you think they want to hear in some cases. So you have to keep that in mind.
Okay, a couple questions. First, how did you find your content expert?
So I am a very strong believer in networking, and any opportunity, and I don't mean going to networking events. I actually don't love those. They always feel so awkward, although I do sometimes. But just when you're in a situation in life and you have an opportunity to meet someone that you think might have something to bring to a relationship, and you might have something to bring to that relationship too, make that connection. So that's just my general theory. So I just talked to every professor that I could while I was in GCU, and I happened to be actually, I think, standing in the hallway, and I met Dr. Wieters. She was my content expert, and we were talking, and I asked her what she did, and she told me a little bit about her background. I told her a little bit about my study, and we agreed that there was some synergies there. And so she agreed early on, actually, this was several months before I ever finished my coursework, that she would be my content expert. And so I made it a point to, every now and then just kind of throw a little lifeline out there. Hey, remember me? You're still on board, right? But the power of networking is really important for that. So that's how I met my content expert. I think there's actually, isn't there online now a place where you can see people's areas of expertise?
Yes, it's on the DC network.
Yeah.
Also, there's another question about the gap. Can you discuss your gap and process you use to identify it?
Yes, you read and then read and then read some more. A lot of research. So when you read, I got this advice actually from Dr. Schmidt. So this is not my own brain power sharing this, but I thought it was really valuable. So you start with, a handful of studies in the basic area that you're interested in. I was interested in grit originally, which, by the way, my original study I was going to do with the United States Marine Corps. This is all about being flexible, guys. I had it all planned out. I flew out to Quantico. We had the whole study mapped out with their research division. In the end, our timelines didn't correlate. And so they said, hey, best of luck out there, but we can't do it because we need to do it in a different timeline. So thanks, but no thanks. And I had written one version of chapter 2 already. So anyway, little side story there, but be flexible. I think that's one of my key messages here.
We have another question now.
Okay.
Did you have the same members of your committee throughout your entire dissertation process? Were there any changes?
No changes. I did have the same people, but I do want to go back real quick. I got off on a little tangent, but I want to finish that thought with the reading and research. So you take those handful of studies, you read all of them, make sure they're relatively new, within the last, so it says 5 years, I say 3 years. Look at the reference page, read every single article in those reference pages. And so when I pulled organizational commitment in as my second, theoretical foundation, I had to do the same thing and read every single reference. And so in all of that literature, I had a spreadsheet that I just put basic information, title, focus, and gap. And usually at the end of each of those studies, it'll say some gaps in the literature. And I just went through and I synthesized where their gaps had been filled and where there were still gaps in all of those studies. And that's how I got to this. So it's a process. So I wanted to close that out, sorry. Okay, so research question. I had 4 research questions in this quantitative study. The reason I had 4 is because I had one kind of overall, and then I had the 3 types of organizational commitment. So we focused in each of those areas, as well as what we call overall commitment, which would be a combination of all those. So you'll see that the research questions are very similar. So what relationship, if any, exists between grit and organizational commitment of behavioral health medical professionals working in a medium-sized private healthcare organization in the Southwestern United States? So the null hypothesis is always going to be that there is no statistically significant relationship if you're a quant person, if you do quantitative. That's always going to be the null. And then the hypothesis would be that there is a significant relationship between the grit S, which is the scale, and the 3-component model for employee commitment. So you can see what my variables were at the bottom, criterion being the org commitment and predictor being the grit. These are the exact same question, except we focus in those specific areas. So this one was what relationship exists between grit and effective commitment, what relationship exists between grit and normative commitment, and what exists between grit and continuance commitment. So here's my sample. I put a picture in here of the G-powered analysis. Everyone's going to have to do that. I don't know why it looks intimidating the first time you open it, but it's really not that difficult to use. So you're going to have to brief this and validate that you used this G-powered analysis for your sample to make sure that you have a sample that, from a quantitative perspective, is generalizable. So this was mine. Based on the data, I needed a minimum of 64 qualified participants. And I wound up with a significantly higher number. I think I had 291. It might be, 19. I have my numbers mixed up. So I had 219 total BHMPs that participated. So I met that sample size requirement. All responses to the survey were through, the survey itself was administered from the organization. All the responses were anonymous, and there was a clear disclaimer from the organization that it was anonymous. So there were actually 390 people that responded, but some people didn't fill out all of the questions. So again, for the quantitative people, if you have people that don't answer all the questions of the survey, well, you have to reduce down your sample size. So for, definitely add in a percentage buffer. So if you need, 100, make sure you get 125 people to actually participate.
There's another question that's just come in regarding the time frame of submitting for I'm just reading this now. When you submitted a version, how long did it take for the different committee members to respond back to you?
They were very good about there's a 2-week commitment that they have to us. So if I submit to my chair, who's Dr. McClendon, she had 2 weeks to review it and get that section back to me. And then same thing, if she then passed it to my content expert, Dr. Wieters had 2 weeks, and then Dr. Chute, who was my methodologist, had the same. I'll tell you though, something that I did that I thought was a much better way to do it. I wouldn't submit necessarily like the behemoth at one time. I learned through the chapter 2 experience that it's better to just submit sections. So, at absolute most, submit a chapter, but, even if you can submit like maybe the first half of a chapter and get them looking at that while you're working on the rest of that chapter, or if you're, moving really fast and you want to, submit chapter 1 while you're working on chapter 3, so that we don't submit the whole proposal at one time, it's easier for them because, they have to take a lot of time out of their life and their day to go read this stuff. Which is what they do, but it's just easier for people to get their head around a focused area. So that was how I did it. But they were always very good about the 2-week timeline. Okay, so here were my data collection procedures. We used the 2 surveys, as I mentioned. We asked a few demographic questions. So we added in their age, gender, level of education, and tenure in the organization. That could be really useful information for some other, analyses of the data. And the organization actually did this. So the way this worked, they wanted to go ahead and do the survey before, any of this was happening. So So we locked in that they were going to do the survey. It became archival data to me. And they then provided me that archival data afterwards. So they have all that information and they can slice and dice this data however they want to in the end game. So, you know, I was actually limited in, you know, what type of surveys we could use because it was going to be archival data for me, but it worked out that it fit the gap neatly and you know, they took some advisement on that. So anyway, so we had some additional data there. And then the participating organization, like I said, provided the archival data to me afterward. All the employees received an email. They had a link to it. They had to, you know, read a precursor that this was anonymous and they could stop the survey at any time. And they all had to give informed consent of doing it. The data analysis here, which is, you know, the part that I think can really stress some people out. So I calculated the mean scores, I summed them, I divided them. I guess I'm actually not going to read all this because this probably is the least exciting part of it. But the key information here, and I put in bold, was that the data for the analysis turned out to be the mean response scores. And we used a Pearson R correlation. And then of course we had to run tests of assumptions. So again, for the quantitative people, there's a lot of different ways that you can measure this. For this particular study, the sample size, it made sense, and I worked with my methodologist on this. It made sense to do the Pearson R correlation. And I will also say that, you know, I am not a statistician. You'll hear a lot of people say they hire a statistician to help them through the data analysis process. I hired someone. I didn't hire her to do it for me. I hired her to work with me to make sure I clearly understood how to do it myself. Because in the end, you're going to have to talk to all of this, and you're going to have to make sure that you know, you own this research and you know the data behind it and how it was analyzed. So, you know, if I could impart any advice on hiring a statistician, I think it's okay, but hire them as a tutor or an advisor. Don't hire them to do the work for you, because then you'll never fully understand it. You know, you're going to be doctors, so you've got to know this stuff. So the results were very interesting. Now, remember I said this company wanted to invest in developing out some attributes, and one of those attributes was grit, because they wanted, the outcome they wanted was more organizational commitment. Well, if you look at the results here, there was no relationship between grit and overall commitment, no relationship between grit and effective commitment, which was the one that was the most correlated with intent to stay. There was no relationship between grit and normative commitment. There was actually a negative relationship between grit and continuance commitment. So it was very interesting because grit is not a bad thing. There's research that suggests grit has a lot of great end results, but it wasn't going to get them the outcome they wanted. It wasn't going to get them the organizational commitment. So my, I guess, advice to you guys on this part, this surprised me, by the way. I fully expected that, you know, they were going to do this and then someday down the road they were going to hire me to do this grit program. I don't know what I was thinking. You can't be married to the idea that your hypothesis is going to be validated. It might not be. You have to be okay with that, because you know, the results could surprise you.
Okay, I have a couple questions.
Okay.
Can you discuss how you measure grit?
Yes, there is a survey. It used to be a 12-question. They shortened it to an 8-question survey. There are 4 questions that focus more on the perseverance piece, and there are 4 questions that focus on the passion piece. And so it's a validated scale that was developed through a series of research studies in 2007, 2009. And there were, I'm trying to think of all of them in total, it was probably about a dozen or so studies if you combine the two to get to that 8-question scale. So it was a validated scale that I used, and that's how you measure it.
Okay, also there was another follow-on question. You said it turned out to be a mean score made the most sense. Can you expand on that?
Yes, so if you look at, I had 219 people that participated, and we'll say for one of the questions, you know, it was a scale of 1 to 5. So let's say you know, half the people answered really high and half the people answered really low. I'm trying to make it simple. So the mean would be right in the middle, a 3. Well, if we're looking at the overall commitment of a population to make it generalizable, we want to look at what does that mean for those people? What is that average for that group of people versus going through each specific individual and saying, okay, well, this one was a 5 on this question and a 1 on this question. No, we're going with the group. The group had a mean score of a 3 on this question. The group had a mean score of 2 on this question or 5 on this question. So that way you're not doing, I mean, you would have a 219 essentially different studies and results if you did it by individual. So it made sense to do the mean of the group. I hope that answered the question.
There's a follow-on question relative to the survey. How did you get permission to use the survey?
So it was developed by Dr. Duckworth, and I just emailed her directly. I found her. She works for the University of Pennsylvania. I sent her a note explaining. I gave her a very organized, very short executive summary of what I was trying to do. And so I had to get permission from her. And then for the commitment survey, which was a 21-question survey, same thing. It was developed by 2 gentlemen. Dr. Myers was the one that was still sort of in communication with the world, we'll say. I reached out to him directly and I got permission directly, and that's all in writing. So I wrote an executive summary to them of basically, here's my problem statement, here's what I'm trying to get at, here's my research question. Do you give me permission to do this? And actually the one for Dr. Myers, he said yes, but he referred me to a website that they have for this particular survey. And it was a, check here if it's for academic purposes, and check here if it's for corporate purposes. And so, I assume if I checked the corporate, maybe there was a fee or something, but that's how I gained permission. I just went directly to the source.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so my recommendations. From a research perspective, determine whether grit is primarily an indicator of retention and self-identified goals. Determine whether a relationship exists. Determine between grit and employee job satisfaction. So this second one here, this recommendation was actually a follow-on study to mine. So these are recommendations for future research. Maybe I should have clarified that, sorry. So there is actually someone who just graduated whenever the last cycle was, or maybe she didn't walk. I think she'll walk in the next one. She's graduated within the last maybe 30 days. With that follow-on study, it determined whether a relationship exists between grit and employee job satisfaction. And you can see the other recommendations there. So you want to think through when you do your research, based on the results, what other research needs to be done out there? So people, are really excited about grit right now. It's kind of a cool, trendy thing. There's a lot of gaps in where the research is. So it's important for us to go get more research to say, let's kind of focus in on where grit brings value and where we need to focus on other things. And then with the commitment piece, there's a need for a lot of companies to understand how do they focus on developing attributes in their employees, or maybe hiring people with certain attributes to keep them there at the organization longer, so they're not paying for that cost of turnover, which is very costly to them. And especially in the healthcare environment or behavioral health environment, you have turnover from people that are working with patients. Then there's a lot of other dynamics that go into the struggles that they have. So, correlating the commitment to, job satisfaction, for example, could be one. And then doing qualitative research. So this was all quantitative stuff that we did. Doing the how and why is also very important. So the last one there was just, let's look at some qualitative research as well. Questions that maybe could be shaped around that quantitative survey, so we could dig in a little bit deeper and understand the how and why. So those are some of my recommendations. From a practice perspective, future practice should focus on leaders and employers in the healthcare industry carefully considering the attributes they seek to recruit or develop in their employees based on the desired outcome. The lack of correlation to overall effective and normative commitment provided information for leaders in the healthcare industry to not use grit as an attribute to try and increase organizational commitment. Instead, healthcare leaders should view grit as a positive attribute for success and achievement of self-identified goals, but not as an attribute that should be identified to develop in employees to promote that commitment in their organization. So that's what I have for my study. I'm going to transition into some lessons learned that I have, and then into some key factors for success. So before I do that, are there any specific questions on the study or the process of the study that I went through?
Okay, yes, there are a couple.
Okay.
Did you modify the survey or did you use it as is?
Oh no, you don't want to modify the survey. It's a process. So I used it completely as is because it's been validated. So you want to validate, to determine it valid and reliable, you have to go through a myriad of research kind of leading up to that for a quantitative study. So, it becomes a very tasking and time-consuming effort to modify those surveys. The caveat I would say is, in some cases, someone's already done all that work. So, for example, the TCM, the three-component model survey for commitment that I used, there were a few different options of longer versus shorter that had already been validated by the guys that created it through a myriad of research. And they developed that survey, 20 plus years ago, and have kind of refined it over the years. So in those cases, yes, use, whatever version you think makes the most sense as long as it's still valid and reliable. But to change it yourself, you're really going to be facing some challenges that will take a lot more time than you want to spend, a lot more tuition money than you'll want to spend.
Right. Also, they wanted to know, when did you get permission to use these instruments?
So I gained permission before I finished my coursework, when I had a general idea of what I wanted to do. And that's actually leading into one of my lessons learned. So I'm going to table that for just a second and I'll answer that. So my first lesson learned, don't be arrogant. This is hard for everybody. So remember I mentioned I was a little arrogant with my chapter 2. I was also a little arrogant with, I got this. I can do this thing. I went to war for 3 years. I've worked in a Fortune 100 company. This should be too easy. I've lived in, 4 states and 3 countries. I can totally do this. Yes, you can totally do this. It is not going to be easy. So kind of check your ego at the door. I had to. The second lesson learned is talk to multiple companies early about potential research and make sure that timelines, realistic ones, are aligned. And so that goes to that question that was just asked. So when I had to steer away from my original study that I wanted to do with the Marine Corps, because our timelines didn't align, I suddenly felt like I was just spiraling. What am I going to do? I have no other backup plan. And this was really a terrible feeling. The good news is I had started the process with the Marine Corps very early on. And I talked to my professors and I asked them questions and wanted to make sure that I was at least on a good track. And people that do research, like the Marine Corps research guys, they know that you have to go through IRB and things may change a little bit. But the general concept was there. But I didn't have a backup plan. So my big lesson learned was talk to a lot of folks out there, use your network. The way that I wound up doing this research study with this company that I worked with is, a girlfriend of mine who's in the PhD program here at GCU, the one that just did the follow-on study and just graduated. She knew, she was friends at church with the president of this healthcare company. And, her and I had become kind of accountability partners. And so we would get together every Tuesday afternoon. Thursday was class. Every Tuesday afternoon and, just kind of go over, okay, where are you? What are your next steps? How are you staying on track? And through that relationship, she was able to get me in to do this research. So if I didn't have that, I would have been in a world of hurt. So I think, talking to a lot of companies and making sure that, and there was another company in there, another healthcare company that I tried with and it didn't work out. So make sure you do that early. So I finally got my research partners, if you will, locked in. I'll say probably in May, I'm thinking. And then, I finished all my coursework in October-ish. So I still had enough time to make it work, but some of my colleagues in my cohort, are still working on finding that research partner. So wherever you are in your process, start networking now on that. Talk to your instructors, have them do the sanity check, because you're going to invest a lot of time and effort in this stuff. So before you go too rogue and, you have what you think is the next Nobel Prize winning, authorship, to just talk to them, especially about what you want to do and how you're finding your gap, and make sure that, that you're really finding a gap. I mean, these guys and gals they're incredibly smart, and, they read this stuff all the time. So they know a lot of research that's been done. So they might be able to say, hey, I know a lot of work has been done in that area. Have you considered seeing if there's a gap here or there? So make sure you're talking to your instructors. Again, it goes back to that power of networking. Make sure you're using your network. Once you gain momentum, do not lose it. No family parties. No, you don't get to go to your brother's 40th birthday. Sorry, brother. You don't get to take those vacations, guys. Your family gets to go and you get to stay home. Or you get to go to a cabin in the woods by yourself with your computer and your family stays home. Otherwise, there are no vacations. There are no breaks, guys. You own this. So one of the things that I realized in this whole process is that if you want your life back, you kind of have to give it up for a while. This is the only thing that you control to get a piece of your life back. You control how long you spend in this program based on the amount of effort that you put in. And I mentioned early on in my introduction that I had 2 kids in this process. So, you've got to own this in order to get your life back. And I'm so serious about that. So don't ever lose that momentum. In fact, I think I have something on the next slide. I'll share that in a minute. And then the last piece from a lesson learned is know your research style and stick with it. There are some people that are really numbers driven and they just like numbers. That's okay. Don't let someone talk you into a qualitative study. There are some people that just want to implode with numbers. That's okay too. Your brain works differently. Don't let someone talk you into a quantitative study, because, and this is, by the way, not endorsed by the university. So there's probably someone out there cringing at this. But you'll hear people on both sides of the fence. You'll hear people say, oh, quantitative, you'll go so much faster. You'll move through super quick. But if you don't think like a quantitative person, you are not going to go faster. Same thing with qualitative. So just know your style and stick with it. And just be able to adjust your study. Don't be married to your study. So be able to adjust it to fit your research style, because that will benefit you more than saying, well, I really want to do this study, so I'll do quantitative anyway, even though I'm a qualitative person. Nice. So here are my factors for success. Number 1, have incremental goals. Okay, it's that theory of you're not going to eat the whole elephant in one big bite. I had a 48-hour rule. So someone asked a question earlier, how many times did you go back and forth? And it was, I'll say somewhere around between 15 and 18 times total going back and forth. I gave myself 48 hours to complete every single thing that they had on there and resubmit. So when that chapter 2 was shredded by Dr. Wieters, and I just wanted to cry, and I am not a crier. I had 48 hours. I had a hard and fast rule for myself. I literally worked for almost that 48 hours straight. I drank so much caffeine. It was living on Dr. Pepper. But you have to stick to your rules. And so that 48-hour rule allowed me to get quick turns back to my chair. And, when someone asked about how long it took me to get through, so we'll say October-ish, which I started writing a little bit beforehand. Chapter 2, this program is really great because you'll start your chapter 2 a little bit earlier. So I at least had a foundation, but we'll say October-ish to, the end of February. You can do that if you have rules like this and you just crank it out. Do one section at a time. Don't do a chapter. So don't sit down and say, I'm going to write chapter 3 today. Just have those specific goals of what you're going to do. My next factor for success is move with a purpose. So block time that works with you and stick to it. So I got up every morning at 3:30. I worked from 3:30 to 6 a.m. Now this was also, by the way, during coursework. So you're kind of wrapping up coursework and just starting to dabble in the dissertation piece. But I worked from 3:30 to 6, and then from 10 p.m. to 11:30 p.m. There were a few exceptions with that one, admittedly. But I never wavered from the 3:30 to 6 during that time period. And then a full 8 hours on Saturday. This was my time block. Everyone's going to have something different. So you guys do what works for you, what works for your family dynamics. But for me, I had to do it that way. And this is a team sport. So this is my next factor. This is absolutely a team sport. Family has to give real commitment. And everybody has to pull together on this one. So if you haven't had that very real talk with your spouse, your partner, your kids, whomever it is that you need to talk to, you need to have that talk with them. So the reason it's so important is, so I had these two kids, two beautiful boys during this process. I had very difficult pregnancies. In fact, I had to take a break, about maybe a 4 or 5 month break and go to a different cohort at one point because my pregnancy was, it was just difficult. Let's leave it at that. So then I wound up having these kids. Well, when I was pregnant with my second and I had my 18-month-old, there was a situation in our family, an unfortunate CPS situation, and a niece and her two children, one who was 8 months old and one who was 18 months old, moved into our house. And she couldn't be unattended with the kids because they had to do a proper investigation. Of course, she didn't do anything wrong, but I had an 8-month-old living in my room next to me who woke up and cried every hour, this poor sweet baby. I had my own 18-month-old, I had another 18-month-old, and I was pregnant. A very difficult pregnancy. I did not waver from my move with a purpose, my time blocks, my 48-hour rule. I didn't waver from it. You cannot have excuses. But because I have such a supportive family, I was able to do that. So my husband's rock star status, he's a cop and a Marine, high energy, thank goodness. So he was really a big part of this. But, he also has a really unique schedule, so he wasn't there all the time. So you've just got to make it work with the rest of your family. I had, my mom every Thursday night watched the kids so I could go to class. My dad every Saturdays watched the kids so I could have that 8-hour block. So team sport, guys, whoever you need to talk to, go have that talk. Your committee is here for you. I mentioned this before. Listen to them, learn from them. Don't take it personal. They are not here to get you, even though it will feel that way every now and then. They really are here for your success. We have a great staff at GCU. I was so impressed with the folks that I was able to work with. So just remember that whatever the harsh things they send back your way is only to make you better. When you're a doctor, people look at you different and they take every word as gospel. It's weird. It's super weird, actually. But you have to know what you're talking about because now you're suddenly at this new level in the eyes of other people. And you need to maintain that credibility for yourself and for your peers. And then friends and nannies. So you're going to have to sacrifice some times with your friends, but you're also going to have to call in those favors. And if you have kids, my advice, have a nanny that can help out, that can take that, oh, dad can't come because he's not feeling well this Saturday. That doesn't mean I get to give up my 8-hour block of work. That's not an excuse. So I got to call the nanny. Hey, I'm sorry if you're busy this Saturday. Can you take the kids? You've got to have those relationships in place and have everyone kind of aligned that, hey, this period is going to be a crazy period. Can you guys be on the team? And it becomes everyone's victory. And then perseverance. You absolutely have to have perseverance or you will not get through this. So you got to dig deep, guys. I mean, you've all got it in you. You would not be sitting here today where you are today if you didn't have perseverance. So I know you have it in you. Dig deep and pull it out and you'll get through this. So what other questions do you have?
All righty. First question, did you hire an editor?
No. Oh, wait, I hired a topical editor. So let me take that back. I hired a topical editor for just like grammar check and punctuation. So for that I did. Because sometimes when you stare at something so long, you don't realize that you just missed 1,000 periods and commas. But I did not hire an editor for the actual content. The reason I did not was because I wanted to know it, every single word in and out. That was me. But I know people who have hired editors and that worked for them. Personally, I I think there's a lot more value in really knowing and understanding, you know, every single word and piece that goes into it. And I feel like editors sometimes take liberties to change things, and you know, changing even one word in research can be very risky. So I didn't trust an editor enough to do that, although I had a great person who did the topical editing for me, and that helped me a lot.
Okay, if you could stop application sharing, there are a couple of the questions.
Okay.
Did you attend any of the dissertation intensive seminars?
I did not attend the dissertation intensive seminars, but I think I was fortunate being in a ground cohort, so I had a lot of access to some of the faculty to be able to talk to them in, you know, hallway conversations or after class or before class. But I think, and actually they were just starting and I was already kind of moving along in mine, but I think there's tremendous value to those. So I think they're a little bit more frequent now, from what I understand, than what they were before. So if you have an opportunity for that, I think it's a great thing to do it. I would recommend it.
Okay, next question. How many pages was your final dissertation?
Gosh, the final one was 186 pages.
Wow. Okay, next question. How was your residency experience?
So residency has changed. This is going to be my caveat. Residency has changed since I did them. So for me, my second residency was very similar to my first, but we didn't have the requirements, the pre-work requirements that are there now. So I think I was actually one of the last residencies for my second one that didn't have to do that pre-work leading up. And I looked at the requirements for the pre-work, and I wish we had have had that before. And this is an iterative process for everybody, right? For the university as well, as they learn and develop an incredible program. They invest so much time and effort to make it better for us. I wish I'd had that. So I think residency, while it was valuable, it was probably not as valuable as they are now, honestly, because of the pre-work that you have to put into it to really laser focus on where you need to adjust fire and you know, the things that you need to focus on. So I think it was good to bounce some general ideas when I did it, but I think now it's more focused. Okay.
There's a question about your PowerPoint template. Where did you get your PowerPoint template from?
I think I just downloaded it off the DC network. Is this still the standard template? Because I just went to, there's a place in there called Forms. I'm trying to remember. Forms and then dissertation and then...
It's on the DC network, yes.
Template. Yeah, okay.
Okay. I'm just reading all the notes here. There was a question here about networking. If you're in a online environment, how would you do your networking?
Well, I would recommend, you know, send a note to your instructors if there's one that you kind of connect with, you know, that you think, hey, this person I feel like is aligned with where I want to go, or they seem to be really savvy and they could help get me in the right direction. I would send a note to them and just say, hey, could we schedule a 10-minute Zoom? Don't be afraid to ask them. All the instructors might hate me for saying that because they're going to have a bunch of requests for that. But I mean, they really want your success. I would also, you know, try to, if you guys ever have a chance to travel out here to Phoenix and kind of time the travel, there's an every other month meeting that gets together with doctoral students. I cannot remember what it's called. Rachel Baling and
DC cohort.
DC cohort, thank you. So Kathy Ames, Dr. Kathy Ames and Dr. Rachel Baling put it together and did a tremendous job. And it's, you know, you have some great guest speakers that you get to network with other people. So I know it's not as easy for some people to just travel out to Phoenix and time it around that, but look at the schedule for that. And if you do have an opportunity, I would just go meet other people. But and the third thing I would do is network with people in your program. So even outside of your cohort, find someone that, I saw people, I love that we listed, where everyone's from. So go look right now and see who lives within 100 miles of you. West Africa, you might have a challenge with that. You might be on your own, but see if there's folks. There were, I think, a handful from Louisiana. See if you guys can set up your own kind of accountability meetings, like what I did with my girlfriend Robin, Dr. Robin Massey. And her and I were able to then develop out this research with her company, and just that networking helped me to become friends with her. And kind of set up your own little chapters regionally. If just be the leader and take the initiative and get people together. I think that would be really valuable. And then you guys use the power of your networks, because everyone's going to have different industries, different people that they know.
Okay, Pops, the last question. Do you have any tips regarding going through the peer review process through AQR?
By the time you get to the peer review process, for the most part, your committee is going to make sure you're well prepared, which is why you have to listen to them. They are there for you. But that's just another iteration. They're going to kick it back and say, hey, you need to make a few tweaks here and there. That's okay. It's just you're going in with the right foundation for the next iteration. So, just same rules apply. 48-hour rule, have your time blocks. It's really
well, we went through a lot of questions and we're just about out of time. So I'd like to thank you, Amanda, for participating in this today. And I'd like to thank all the doctoral learners for participating. You hear it firsthand. This is what goes on. As far as the review process, we've submitted an article for publication. It's gone back 3 or 4 times for review, and it's part of the process. So I'd like to thank everyone. This will be posted on DC Network in a couple of days. And have a great day. And I look forward to seeing everyone at graduation as you walk across and get hooded and receive your diploma. So thank you very much. Have a wonderful day. Good evening.
Thank you.